All right, so I thought I'd just talk you through some of my concepts, ideas, thought processes in relation to the next campaign I'm planning on running. So let's talk about 40,000, aka Warhammer 40,000. There's a lot of great role playing games out there, and you know the general pitch. It is the 41st millennium. For more than 100 centuries, the Emperor of Mankind has sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth. He is the master of mankind by the will of the gods, and master of a million worlds by the might of his inexhaustible armies. He is a rotting carcass writhing invisibly with power from the dark age of technology. He is the carrier lord of the Imperium, for whom 1,000 souls are sacrificed every day so that he may never truly die. Yet, even in his deathless state, the Emperor continues his eternal vigilance. Mighty battle fleets cross the demon-infested miasma of the warp, the only route between the distant stars. They are waylit by the Astronomicon, the psychic manifestation of the Emperor's will. Vast armies give battle in his name on uncounted worlds. Greatest amongst his soldiers are the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, bioengineered super warriors. But their comrades in armor legion, the Imperial Guard and countless planetary defense forces, the ever-vigilant Inquisition, and the tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, to name but a few. But for all their multitudes, they are barely enough to hold off the ever-present threat to humanity from aliens, heretics, mutants, and far, far worse. To be a man in such times is to be one amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. These are the tales of those times. Forget the power of technology and science, for so much has been forgotten, never to be relearned. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the grim, dark future, there is only war. Quite grim and dark. I think it's a fairly accurate statement to say that. And of course, there's a lot of great Warhammer role-playing games that already build on that premise. But I'm interested in a slightly different premise, and I might read to you the pitch that I gave to my team over the weekend. The Imperial Guard who fight in the 15th Helorian Crusade amongst the bravest men and women in the Imperium, battling orcs, chaos, and fouler things in the depths of the Halo sector. But they won't get far without supplies, and that's where the War Master's Special Office for the acquisition of personnel and equipment replacement, the SOPAs, come in. This elite team of paper shufflers has been deployed to the hive world of Kafkadia to ensure that the lasguns keep flowing, the tanks keep rolling, and the War Master can keep his word to the High Lords of Terror and bring the Helorian sector back into the Imperium. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only paperwork. So, a slightly different concept there. I thought it'd be fun to play around with the idea of bureaucrats as heroes. And of course, one thing we know about war is every army marches on its stomach. And, well, amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics. So how do we build on this, though? And it's a fun idea, right? So I used to be a bureaucrat, in fact. I was a bureaucrat for many years, a public servant in the Australian Department of Infrastructure and then the Australian Treasury. And I think we're an underrated group, us bureaucrats. There's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on, and certainly plenty of exciting things would have gone on in the bureaucracies of Australia and around the world in the past 12 months during the COVID crisis. Well, longer than 12 months now. Certainly would have been exciting to be the people trying to acquire vaccines, set up vaccination centres, and all of that's been done by bureaucrats. So the idea that there's no exciting stories in the bureaucracy to be told is, I think, a false one. And yeah, so, but what goes into making an RPG? And I think when I'm building a campaign, I like to think of a couple of things. Like, what inspiration am I going to be drawing on? What do the player characters do in the setting? What does an adventure or session look like? So for a game like Dungeons and Dragons, you've got pretty clear inspirations. You've got, Lord of the Rings, Conan the Barbarian, various other fantasy epics, but also the sort of grim and gritty skirmishing. And then player characters, they're various scoundrels and adventurers who seek their fortune in the grim depths of dungeons. And an average adventure looks like, going down into a dungeon, fighting monsters, seeking treasure. That's what Dungeons and Dragons looks like. But what does a game about bureaucrats in the 41st millennium look like, and where are the inspirations coming from? So there's a couple of places we could go for inspiration here. I'm thinking, the very, very obvious inspiration is The Office, right? Classic workplace comedy about working in an office. But I'm not quite sure that this game is going to be about interpersonal relationships. This is a bit more of not necessarily a heroic game, but it's a game about more than just having funny jokes in an office. But humor is definitely going to be a big part of it. So I think a more interesting inspiration is sort of Blackadder, and particularly Blackadder the Fourth. That sort of low-level people, having funny interactions in the back of a raging war, but also actually trying to solve problems that they're encountering. And the key thing I think about Blackadder is the enemies aren't really in Blackadder. They're not the Germans. They're not the Germans on the other side of the trench line. They are the various officers, characters that they interact with behind the lines that cause problems. Another source of inspiration would be Shadow of a Merchant Prince, I think. It's a Raymond Feist novel that goes into some detail about a merchant prince trying to establish the mercantile backing for a war that a kingdom needs to protect itself. And of course, so those are some of the inspirations. The player characters, well, we've sort of established what they are, who they are. They are various Imperial Guard administrative officers, but they're not just they're not just standard paper pushers, but they're the elite unit of bureaucrats dispatched to solve problems in the supply chain. So we're not just talking about, the people filing every report. These are the guys that the War Master goes to when there's a problem in the supply chain, when something gets backed up. And so the player characters might be, say, staff officer, veteran quartermaster. Think of a couple of character concepts: tech priest, engineer, some sort of archivist who uncovers things, maybe even a black marketeer, market operators. So those are some of the concepts of play characters people might pick up in this world. And what's fun about it? Like, where does the fun come from? Because I think with Dungeons and Dragons, it's sort of obviously clear on the face of it where the fun comes from. It's very clear that you're going to be going into a dungeon, having a kick-ass game of cinematic combat. I don't think that's quite where the fun comes from here. And I think the inspiration here for why I'm going for this paper shuffling thing is not actually from any of these media inspirations, even though those are all media that I enjoy. I think the ultimate inspiration here is a recent session in a game that I was playing that was sort of a more standard RPG. The characters were various command staff of a basically sort of Battlestar Galactica inspired thing. But what the players said was one of their favorite parts of that campaign was this session where they just solved disputes and problems between the crew of one ship and the pilots on the main sort of Battlestar Galactica thing. And they really enjoyed it. There was no like violence or conflict. They were just, well, there was conflict obviously, but it wasn't resolved through violence. It was resolved through them sort of solving the problems, the interpersonal problems that were getting in the way. And there were a couple of other sessions in that Battlestar Galactica game that played off that sort of energy, where it wasn't so much about fighting an enemy, fighting an obvious opponent, and using violence to defeat that opponent. It was really about solving problems. And I think that brings me back to another one of my inspirations. This is going to be a sort of interesting one. Factorio, which is a management game where, in Factorio you're building this factory, but the real part of the game, which is interesting to people, is not the building of the factory, but it's the solving of the problems, the things that go wrong as you're building that factory and trying to investigate and find and dig through your factory and look through all your supply belts and train lines and chains of operations and identify the problem. And then when you solve that problem, it's very satisfying. So this isn't so much about, solving problems and solving problems in the Crusade's supply lines. So what do the characters do? So we open on a session, and there's going to be some sort of, every time there's going to be some sort of supply question for the Crusade. They need something, and they're not getting it. And the player character's job will be to unravel the various tangled supply lines on Capcadia, find out who or what is in the way of the Crusade getting what they need. And at the end, they will have either they'll have solved a problem or convinced someone to help them. So, for an example, a couple of example scenarios. For example, the Crusade attacking a water planet. They need amphibious vehicles. The player characters will need to, for example, convince the local tech priests to produce those amphibious vehicles, which may be against their religion, ASTC. So, or say needs more las guns. Very simple thing, but the factory has broken down and is filled with and affected by a flood. PCs might need to either secure another factory or rescue the workers from that flooded facility. So it's not just going to be, they're not just going to be paper pushing around, right? Like they are going out to these places, they're going out to the factory, they're working out what's broken down, they're trying to, they're talking to the locals, they're helping the workers. So there's going to be there will be action in the game. It's not just going to be yeah, talking and negotiating, but that action isn't necessarily going to be shoot 'em up. But one of the ways that I think about this, another way that I think about like what an adventure might look like, is with something that I take from Blades in the Dark. So Blades in the Dark is a game by great game by John Harper, and it's a fantastic game about a group of scoundrels in a fantasy city. And one of the things the game does really fantastically is it lets you set up a mission really quickly. And the way that it does that is there's a couple of mission types that you might have: an assault, deception, stealth, occult, social, transport. Whenever you're trying to do something in the game as a team, you work out what the plan type is. So whether it's an assault, you pick a detail, and then you roll dice to see. You roll an engagement roll to see how well that engagement is going. But defining those 6 engagement types really gives you an idea into what the sort of scoundrels in Blades of the Dark are going to be doing. They're either going to be assaulting people, they're going to be deceiving them, they're going to be sneaking into somewhere, consorting with the occult, making social connections, or transporting things through difficult areas. And that's one of the things that I'm thinking about when it comes to paper warp. I'm not necessarily committing to using the whole Blades in the Dark framework, but I'm thinking about what kind of engagements a team of bureaucrats might engage in that would be interesting and fun to play out. So the obvious one, negotiate. Another faction has something Crusade needs, and they need to acquire it. Convince them to let it go. Tit for tat. Trading or deception. Players decide, PCs decide. Another thing I was thinking of, obviously, when you're thinking of bureaucrats and paperwork, we're going to start thinking about lawyers. And what is another way that bureaucrats might get something they want? They go to court. They litigate. They go to the superiors of the faction. So someone has something the Crusade needs. They won't give it up. Players need to work out how to win in court or win over their superiors through argument. And what they're going to... So for negotiating, what do the players need? Bargaining chip. What bargaining chip are they going to use? What do the players need for litigating? They'll need some sort of evidence of misconduct. Another thing they might simply do, which is somewhat more standard sort of role-playing game thing, they will extricate the item needed or steal it. Okay, steal it. Go in stealthily. What do the players need? A point of entry into the facility where the item is kept. Litigate, extricate, negotiate. It's definitely a theme there. And I think the other obvious one, investigate. It's a problem. Complication. The players need to go in and investigate what is going wrong before they can solve the supply issue. That's great. So we've got 4 sort of basic types of engagement that players might engage in. And I think once you've thought about that, then the question becomes, what what do the characters need to engage with that, and what's the rule set going to look like? I think that's an important question that we sort of haven't engaged with at all to this point in discussing the game. And there's a couple of frameworks I go to every time when it comes to hacking up a quick role playing game for a setting. There's the Powered by the Apocalypse system, which consists of, and the Forged in the Dark system, which is what Blades in the Dark is. It's this system where you roll a couple of dice, and your highest dice determines what you get. And there's all these complicated elements to that dice roll every time, and your characters have various abilities, but there's not special rules associated with each of those abilities. There's just one sort of resolution set. And then the other system that I go to all the time is you can't see, but this system, the Apocalypse World system, or the Powered by the Apocalypse system. And in Apocalypse World, instead of having just sort of a generic action resolution mechanic, which works really well in Blades in the Dark, but they have a different system where you have different moves, and each move is built in a format like this. So a move is like, when you threaten someone, roll plus 2d6 plus your threat score, say. On a 10 plus, you succeed. On a 7 to 9, you get a mixed outcome. On a 6 minus, you fail. You miss. Something bad happens. But the interesting thing is, like, it's not going to be just that simple. It's not going to be you succeed or you get a mixed outcome. So the engine of Powered by the Apocalypse is this is that the 10 plus will be defined specifically. So when you threaten someone, they have to choose: do what you want or suffer the consequences. On a 7 to 9, there'll be a mixed outcome. They can also choose flee or get out of your way. So that creates a sort of this genre engagement, this genre emulation engine where you're emulating what happens in the fiction every time you threaten someone. And the way that you build that move is you look at, like, for example, if you were building a Battlestar Galactica Powered by the Apocalypse game, which is exactly what we were playing before, you'd have a move about what a starfighter combat looks like, and you'd have specific outcomes on a 10 plus and a 7 to 9 that tell you what happens when you succeed or get a mixed outcome in a starfighter engagement. You're not having to adjudicate this on the fly, what these things come out to be. You're just coming out with them. So those are two really interesting options. I'm pretty attracted to the Powered by the Apocalypse system, but it does require a little bit more work because you've got to come up with those moves that mean something. And so I'm just sort of thinking about what sort of moves and actions people might use in these bureaucratic world. And I think it's worth sort of moves, actions that someone might take, one of these bureaucrats might take. So they're going to be pulling strings. So influencing people using favors. And they're going to be negotiating directly. So they're trying to making offers and counters. Indirect favors. Direct offers. They are definitely going to be trying to deceive people. Deception. Or manipulate. Not openly hiding, concealing deceiving or concealing, maybe. Hiding errors. Hiding things. They will be, I guess, arguing, debating, using the law. Got to come up with a better name for that concept, but they're going to be arguing and debating or using the law. They will be doing some sort of standard things. So I think, we've got to think about negotiating. We've got to negotiate a move. It's all about negotiating. Is that the right way to go about things? Anyway, there's a lot of these sort of questions around this. So I'm gonna come back to that in a second about what moves and actions. But what kind of characters might people play? So there's one of the things finally you want to have different character playbooks, and what axis of those characters can be defined on. And I think it's going to be sort of their attitude or operational, the area that they feel most comfortable operating in. So I think one of the obvious ones is going to be the staff officer, who's by the book, knows the Imperial Guard handbook by heart. Then you've got some sort of veteran sergeant who's more amenable to doing things laterally. So he's maybe your sort of veteran quartermaster who's good at, he's probably a veteran of a lot of combat, so he's happy to threaten people, happy to go up against them. And 2, but he's also got a lot of connections for his veteran, and he's probably got some connections with all sorts of interesting people. But I think there's even, then you might have a black marketeer, someone who really gets things done under the table. And then you've got maybe a tech priest or technical specialist, solves problems using technology, thinking, investigation. Any other character types that I should be thinking of? Interested to get ideas. Maybe military police, so you can really threaten people. Maybe use the legal system, but also maybe investigate things. And then maybe someone who's so we've got a black marketeer. I'm not sure if this overlaps totally with that, but maybe like a noble or dilettante. Someone who's been, bloody hard to spell that, who's been conscripted into the military, like a disowned son, but he's got a lot of connections with wealthy and high up people, and he's a bit of a shit person, so he uses connections in high up places. I think at least you've got a couple of interesting playbooks that would have interesting conflicts between how they want to engage with a specific problem, but they're also capable of working together to solve a problem. And they sort of make sense that all of those people might be in sort of special administrative office. So I think that's a good set to start with. 6 playbooks. I've got 4 players, so 6 playbooks, 4 players, so definitely a choice there. I don't know if so that's sort of how I'd start looking at this thing. Then I've really got to go into designing the system, and I think there I'm going to steal sort of wholeheartedly. So some sort of what do we need? Some sort of the obvious system is we need an actions system, resolution system, moves, or just rolling dice, and adjudicating on the fly. I really like that. Let me pull up, for example, a PBTA style rulebook. So we've got Last Fleet. So the Last Fleet is this Powered by the Apocalypse game that we use. It's basically Battlestar Galactica, and their moves make sense because they look like this. So you've got your Battlestar Galactica. So obviously you have an engage in battle mode, and it's here, and it looks like this. And instead of using 10 plus and 7 to 9, they're talking about hit and 7 to 9. Hit is 10 plus. It's the same thing. And that's the sort of thing we'd be creating if we were creating an action resolution system there. Now, there's a lot of other Powered by the Apocalypse worlds, and I think the engine here is, with Powered by the Apocalypse, is you change the set of basic moves, and you change the game that you're creating. And I think these Battlestar Galactica ones actually make a really good, they're showing me a couple of things that I've missed. So, for example, we've got an investigation move here, seeking out. There's a reaching out and sort of making friends with people. Cover-up move, that's sort of my deception move there. So those are all sorts of moves that I think some of those moves make sense, but I think they could be tweaked slightly to be in the 40k universe. One of the things you'll note that I don't have here is any sort of playbook that engages with the fantasy, psychic, magic universe of 40k. I don't think it quite matches. We're sort of trying for something that's a bit gritty and down to earth rather than the epic magic of the 40th millennium, but and people who are really high up. So no Space Marine, there's no Psyker, there's no aliens. I think all those things can intersect with the game as you play it, but they're not going to be sort of core parts of it. So there's some of my thoughts around how the game might work out. Interested to know what you guys think. And a couple of designing system. I need consequences system. So I don't think hit points doesn't make sense. Sanctions, they might be subject to administrative sanctions. They might lose favors, debts they owe to other people. Lose status. And there's obvious consequences, I think. Consequences for the Crusade. So the way that I'm imagining this game is I'm not just going to have a character sheet, but I'm going to have a sheet that shows the progress of the Crusade. So it'll show, what world the Crusade's up to and where. So Blaze in the Dark has something similar, right? You have your character sheet, but you also have a crew sheet. And I'm thinking the crew sheet here, which shows, we've got your abilities for your crew. But the important thing is this claims map, which shows your crew as it expands and covers different parts of the city, and it builds things. So I'm thinking that there will be a character sheet, but there will also be a crusade sheet. And instead of having this claims map, it'll show the different worlds that the crusade is fighting on at that point, and there'll be some sort of identity of what kind of materials or supplies they might need for there. So there's definitely going to be consequences for the crusade. Maybe we need a whole sort of system for favors and connections and debts. So I know there's strings, which is a system from a Apocalypse World game that I really like called Monster Hearts, which is about teen romance, but it's also about manipulation, power, and doesn't quite make sense, I think, to use that exact system, but it's definitely an inspiration, I think. So yeah, there's some thoughts that I've had on how we might turn a pretty strange concept. In fact, it's a concept that I know is used in jokes a lot of the time. You've got the classic joke of the monsters in the Dungeons and Dragons game sitting down to play a game of office workers and officers, and this is essentially what we're trying to create here with Paper Warped. That's the name of the game that I come up with. We are trying to create an exciting game about bureaucrats in the 41st millennium. Not sure if we're going to succeed, but I'm ready to give it a red hot try. So, thanks for listening.